Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. Looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 270. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about parks, pizza, and Coney Island as we go to Brooklyn, New York.
Cathedral, got to sit in one more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get into this week's interview, I do have three news stories for you. The first news story is TripAdvisor, which happens to be my day job, by the way, did a survey about family travel. And one of the interesting things I thought that I saw in there is that 31% of people surveyed would shell out additional money to sit in a child-free section of an airplane. So it'll be interesting to see if some airline takes them up on that. And then speaking of surveys, Foursquare did a study on the rudest cities in the world. And their winning city is Manchester, UK, followed by El Paso, Texas, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Bloomington, Indiana, and Riverside, California. And the way they determine that is based on the percentage of curse words used in check-in recommendations posted to the Foursquare service. And then I'm sure many of you have been following what's been going on in Egypt. Egypt, now that it has calmed down a bit, is trying to get tourists back. And certainly for many of you, it's too soon. But one of the things that's interesting is that some of the rates for Egypt are being cut by as much as 50%. So at least for someone, it may be time to go back to Egypt. For links to all those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Andrew Hickey, who's coming to us from the Brooklyn Nomad and coming to talk to us about Brooklyn, New York. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Chris.
Andrew is one of a series of recent people I've had on the show because I've invited them on because I would love to have Andrew on the show. Andrew does some great travel blogging, and we've had a chance to meet in New York a couple years ago. And Andrew, why should someone come to Brooklyn? People are going to New York all the time, but usually they're going to Manhattan.
Yeah, I get that question a lot, especially with my blog being called The Brooklyn Nomad. People seem to come to New York and they just focus on Manhattan. And Manhattan is great. I love Manhattan. I work in Manhattan, and there's plenty to do. But there's so much to see and do in Brooklyn that people don't really realize that there's so much going on over in that borough. But there's just tons of restaurants. There's cafes, the nightlife. And there's just so many different cultures. I mean, there's Polish, Irish, Russian, Chinese. There's so many different areas of Brooklyn. And the other thing about Brooklyn is that it's so big that people think they could just go over the Brooklyn Bridge, have a slice of pizza, and now they've seen Brooklyn. And that really is not Brooklyn. There's just so much to do that you really would need in a couple of days to actually cover all of Brooklyn. I would highly suggest, if you're visiting Manhattan, maybe put 2 days aside, if you're there long enough, put 2 days aside and try to see as much as Brooklyn as possible.
Okay. And we should say, first of all, in terms of where Brooklyn is, we're talking about something that is geographically, although not culturally, on Long Island.
Yeah. It's pretty much I think it's the northernmost. I hope I'm correct on that.
It's actually the westernmost part of Long Island.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, people don't really realize that. They don't think it's part of Long Island. People think Suffolk County, Nassau County is Long Island, but yeah, Brooklyn is in Long Island.
And if you had an itinerary to suggest to people to how to explore Brooklyn, where would you start us?
If you're starting from Manhattan, I would definitely stop off in DUMBO, which stands for Down Under Manhattan Bridge Overpass. It's also known as Vinegar Hill. I would start there since it's the closest, but there's so much to see and do in that neighborhood. It's a really cool neighborhood to visit, whether if you're going with your wife or if you're going with a family. There's so many different things to do, tons of great restaurants, again, cafes. So I would start there, and then, again, the best way to get around is by train, so I would move down to Park Slope. Park Slope has Prospect Park. Prospect Park is 585 acres of green space that, again, people don't realize we have in Brooklyn. We have lots of parks and lots of things to do in Brooklyn besides eating pizza. Prospect Park was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who also created or designed Central Park, although he preferred Prospect Park when he was asked which one he liked better. That's true. That's actually quoted. I'm not making that up. Also, Coney Island, even though it's still undergoing revitalization, I would try to get there now to see a lot of old Coney Island before they completely fill it up with Starbucks and Applebee's. But Coney Island is definitely a great spot that, again, a lot of people don't visit because it's so far away from Manhattan, but definitely worth, I think it's about a 45-minute train ride, and it brings you right into Coney Island. So it's once you get off the train, you're right there.
Okay. And I'm going to slow you down just a little bit here. We're going to go back to the three places you've named so far. I'm going to do them a little more slowly. So when I go to DUMBO, what am I going to do? You said there are cafes and restaurants. Are you going to recommend some that are worth stopping at for us? I assume there's quite a few of them there. So give us a little more guidance what we do in DUMBO.
Okay. The place that everybody goes to is Grimaldi's Pizza. You've probably heard of it, and I think pretty much anyone, even if you haven't been to Brooklyn, you've heard of Grimaldi's Pizza. When you do go there, no matter if it's weekday, weekends, afternoon, night, there's always a line outside. It's worth the wait. You know, there's a lot of people that recommend touristy things. This is considered a tourist attraction in Brooklyn, but the pizza is worth the wait. You cannot order a slice. You have to order an entire pie, and I believe it's cash only. So I've waited on the line plenty of times, and actually when you wait online, you actually meet a lot of cool people that are either from Brooklyn or traveling from all around the world just to have this pizza. I would definitely suggest that, you know, if you're going to go to DUMBO one time, that would be the place that you have lunch or dinner. You can get Brooklyn lager while you're there. It's a really cool place, really great atmosphere, a lot of energy, and a lot of pizza.
And I assume we're talking about a New York-style pizza, lots of cheese, and you have to fold it to eat it?
Exactly.
Okay.
Thin crust, none of that Chicago pizza. Thin crust, and yeah, I've had an entire pie by myself. I'm probably going to embarrass my wife, but she almost finished an entire pie by herself. So you could finish an entire pie because it is thin crust and it is really good. And right around the corner, because DUMBO is a pretty small neighborhood, right around the corner is Jacques Therese Chocolate. And he has a place in Manhattan, I believe it's downtown, but the Brooklyn location is Baby. That's the one that he is at the most. You'll spot him in there making chocolate. Definitely would stop in there after, not before, having all that pizza for dessert. And in the summertime, too, he makes ice cream sandwiches and milkshakes, and It's a really small spot, too, so you really can't hang out there. But, again, the DUMBO neighborhood is so walkable. It's cobblestone streets, and it's really cool just to walk around there. After that, after filling yourself up, Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is another really nice green space that a lot of people, even New Yorkers, I mean, people that I know in Brooklyn and in Queens don't even know that this exists. But Brooklyn Bridge Park, which is pretty much underneath the Brooklyn Bridge, it's also very close to Manhattan Bridge, is a really nice spot to hang out on a spring, summer day. Just plenty to do right there. I mean, the views alone, you're looking at downtown Manhattan skyline right in front of you, and the Brooklyn Bridge is pretty much on top of you, and it's just a great place to hang out.
Okay. And you also mentioned then we're going on to the park, and I've forgotten the name of the park, built by the...
Prospect Park.
Prospect Park. And what are we doing on Prospect Park?
Prospect Park is huge, so there is so much going on. It's a miniature Central Park, but still, when you're in Prospect Park, you do not feel like you're in Brooklyn. There is barbecue pits that you can use during the summer. On Saturday morning, I highly recommend going to the farmers market, which I believe opens at 7 a.m., goes all the way till about 4 in the afternoon. It's all farms from New Jersey, Long Island, all coming in with seafood and baked goods and vegetables. I mean, there's just so much to do right there. It's a great spot, too, for families to hang out. That's Prospect Park, and Prospect Park is in Park Slope, which is a very popular family neighborhood. It was voted recently, I believe, as the #1 family neighborhood in a big city to live in. So Park Slope, while it's very family-oriented, also has a lot of great restaurants and cafes that, you know, even if you don't have a little one, you're going to have a great time in Park Slope. Fifth Avenue in Park Slope, Restaurant Row, and that is just lined with a lot of French bistros and Italian restaurants. The one that I highly recommend is called Al Di La, and it's on 5th and Carroll. It's run by a married couple. She cooks. He runs the restaurant, so he'll greet you when you come in. She's in the back making today's specials. It's usually seasonal. Definitely a great place to visit, extremely popular with locals and tourists, so you're going to want to get there early. There's no reservations. It opens around 5 p.m., so highly suggest getting there as soon as you can because an hour or two later there's a long wait time. But right around the corner from that, they have their own little wine bar. So what they'll do is if you get there and there's a really long wait, they'll suggest you go around the corner to their wine bar, and they'll call you when your table's ready. So you can go have some wine, hang out, and then they'll tell you to come back around. That right there is probably the best place on Fifth Avenue, in my opinion, to go to. And as far as cafes go, Ozzy, it's called Ozzy Cafe. It's a really nice coffee shop. There's two of them. There's one on Fifth Avenue and one on 7th Avenue. I recommend the one on 5th. It's bigger, free Wi-Fi, and you can just hang out, drink coffee, tea, and people watch. It's a really nice spot.
Okay. And then you took us to Coney Island, but you didn't tell us, what are we doing in Coney Island? We're getting a Coney Island dog, or we're riding some particular ride? What is there to do on Coney Island right now?
Yeah, definitely. When you get to Coney Island, again, if you take the train, which most people are going to do, when you get out of that train station, one of the first things you're going to see is Nathan's Famous. It's as soon as you walk out. That's where they have a hot dog eating contest. Everyone's heard of it. And honestly, I've had a lot of Nathan's hot dogs in my time, and I've had them in other places outside of Brooklyn. And something about the Brooklyn location that is just 10 times better than any other place. I've had Nathan's in other places, and I haven't liked it. But for some reason, the one in Brooklyn, particularly in Coney Island, is great. They have cheese fries, the hot dog, and the fresh lemonade. That's what most locals will order when they go there. They also sell frog legs. That's the only Nathan's, I think, that sells frog legs. That was from the original menu.
Interesting.
And they kept it on there. Yeah, they've kept it on there. I don't see anyone ordering them, but it's on the menu. So if you want to have those when you go to the beach, they have them there. Of course, they have like beer and other things, but the cheese fries, hot dog, that's the best thing to get when you're there. And there's not much else as far as Coney Island, as far as big restaurants go, not much because they're in the middle of just rebuilding. Last year, they had opened up a few new rides. They reopened up the amusement park. This summer, they're supposed to have, if everything goes according to plan, about 2 or 3 more roller coasters. They have a lot of plans. The mayor, Bloomberg, has a lot of plans. He has a bunch of investors that have invested billions into Coney Island. They're going to have a new aquarium. There's an aquarium there now, but they're going to update it. It's really archaic. They're going to update that. They're even trying to push for casino hotels to compete with Atlantic City, but there's just been a lot of back and forth on whether or not they can actually do that. But I still highly recommend Coney Island, even year-round. It's a really cool place. Even if it's the winter, to walk on the boardwalk when no one's there, it's just really old-school Brooklyn, or what's left of it, and really great photo opportunity year-round. Oh, and also Brooklyn Cyclones. They have a park, MCU Park, which is home to the New York Mets-affiliated Brooklyn Cyclone softball team. Definitely check out a game. It's a really fun time. Tickets are really cheap, and it's a really nice park. Park opened, I believe, 10 years ago. It's a really nice park with great views of the beach. So that's also another place that a lot of people don't really think about going to when they visit New York.
Excellent. And then I think that's where I interrupted you in your tour of Brooklyn. So where do we go after Coney Island?
Okay, GreenPoint, Williamsburg. Williamsburg, more of the hipster crowd, a lot of indie bands playing in clubs, kind of stolen away the East Village feel. A lot of the people that can't afford to live in the East Village have moved over to Williamsburg. So you're going to get a very artsy scene. You're going to get a lot of, again, a younger crowd. There's cafes, there's markets on the weekends. Williamsburg, right next to it, is GreenPoint, and that is nicknamed Little Poland for obvious reasons. It's a very large Polish community, which means you're going to get Polish restaurants, Polish cafes. There's also Polish bakeries, Polish butcher shops. I mean, it's pretty great. My wife's from Poland. She was born in Poland, and we go there, and the restaurants, she said, are just like what she had in Poland growing up. I take her word on that as being authentic enough. But if you walk down Manhattan Avenue, which is the main strip, it's just lined with Polish restaurants and bakeries, candy stores. You'll get a lot of stuff that really isn't sold in a lot of U.S. candy stores or bakeries. It's a very European feel when you're walking down Manhattan Avenue.
Okay. And Williamsburg, so we're up there by the Williamsburg Bridge.
Exactly.
Okay. Where to next?
Bay Ridge, Bensonhurst, very Italian, also Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods. Bay Ridge has become more of a large Arab community in the last 10 years, but still predominantly Irish, Italian. Again, Fifth Avenue and Third Avenue are where you're going to want to most likely visit. It's, again, lined with numerous restaurants, bars, great nightlife. There's a bar in Bay Ridge called the Salty Dog, which it's a fireman's bar, but it's also fun on the weekends. It's an actual firehouse that was converted into a bar. The doors open in the front, similar to how fire truck was leaving. So the entire thing opens up so you can see into the entire bar if you're walking by. They do that only, obviously, when the weather's nice. Doesn't work as well in the winter. But Bay Ridge, then Bensonhurst right next to it, again, very old-school Brooklyn. That, to me, is one of the best neighborhoods in Brooklyn that a lot of people just don't seem to visit. Everyone is about Park Slope and Williamsburg just because it's close to Manhattan. It has a younger feel. It gets a lot more media attention. But Bensonhurst is what Brooklyn was 50 years ago. I mean, you have the pork store on the corner and the butcher shops, and you have the old barber shops with the pole outside and the Italian guys in there that have lived there for the last 50, 60 years. And the Italian restaurants are very authentic, and it's very simple, nothing fancy. You're not going to go in and have, a chic experience at any of the restaurants. Everything looks as if it's been frozen in time, but the food is amazing in most of the restaurants. One that particularly stands out is Joe's of Avenue U. It's a huge building on Avenue U, obviously, but inside it looks as if it hasn't been updated since the 1970s, but it has the best homemade pasta that I've ever had in New York. The marinara sauce is so good I could just drink it out of a cup. It's really, really good. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. I find myself there a lot because I live close by, so I usually go to that place if I want really authentic homemade Italian food. And also in Bensonhurst is L&B Spumoni Gardens, and that is known obviously for their Spumoni ice cream, which is, again, ridiculously addictive. I find myself buying a lot of that and putting it in my freezer. But the pizza there is what everyone is going for, and that's Sicilian slice, but it's the upside down. So it's the cheese first, sauce on top, compared to obviously the other way around. People line up for that. You could sit outside. It's kind of like a beer garden, minus the beer. But you could sit outside, and that's another spot that people talk about. They don't really find themselves there. You guys could pick a couple of trains from Manhattan to get to it, but I think that it's worth it if you want a real Brooklyn experience.
If I go to Brooklyn, what's going to surprise me?
How big it is, because, again, time and again, people that ask me for advice about Brooklyn, they're telling me, I got an extra day, I want to see all of Brooklyn. Where do I start and where do I end? And I have grown up in Brooklyn. I could never do much in a day. I could barely get through one of the neighborhoods in a day. To really think that you can cover all of Brooklyn, even in 2 days, is kind of impossible unless you just want to race through it in a car. I think that's the biggest surprise.
And I want to guess that Brooklyn's like twice the size of Manhattan, roughly.
I believe it is. It's the most populous of the boroughs. 2.5 million from the last census, how many live in the borough of Brooklyn. So that alone shows you just how busy it is. Square miles-wise, it is not the biggest. That's Queens. Queens is a little over 100. Yeah, a little over 100 Queens. And Queens, obviously this is a Brooklyn episode, but Queens is another place. But that's the second most populous, but that's the biggest borough, Queens. Brooklyn is about 70 square miles. Manhattan is about 23 square miles.
So even more than twice as big.
Yeah, that shows you that, again, people think of Manhattan as this monster and it's so big and there's so much going on, and then they look at Brooklyn as like this little thing next to it when it's the complete opposite. And I tell people, again, to me, again, growing up in New York, if you have the time, take a trip just to Brooklyn. I mean, you really can do so much. I mean, we have beaches, Gerritsen Beach, Coney Island Beach. There are beaches, so if you're here in the summer, you can go to a beach. They have places to stay. There's hotels. So there is a lot to do in Brooklyn on its own. If you've been to Manhattan a couple of times and you want to see something different, I would definitely suggest Brooklyn.
Okay. Is there a particularly great day of the year to go to Brooklyn?
Great day of the year. 4th of July with the Coney Island hot dog eating contest is a funny day. I've gone once or twice. The only problem with that is that it can be really hot because New York summers can be pretty brutal, as I know you probably have experienced. They can get very hot and humid. The best day, I know it's going to sound really awful, but I love every day in Brooklyn. I love it year-round. To pick out one day, I mean, we don't really have we have a Brooklyn Queens Day. I believe that's in November where we celebrate Brooklyn, but we don't really do much, and I don't really get up from work, so I don't really see that as a special day.
Okay.
Yeah, there's not really a particular day that really stands out.
How about any particular neighborhood? Columbus Day in the Italian section, or Stuyvesant Day, and I don't know if there's a...
Yeah, there's a San Gennaro festival in Manhattan, but there's something similar to that in Brooklyn, and I believe that's in the first 2 weeks of September, and that's in Bensonhurst.
Okay.
And again, if you go to Bensonhurst, I believe it's 86th Street, where all the restaurants on 86th Street bring their stuff outside, and you can just walk around and you can try samples of it, free cannolis everywhere. So that is the first 2 weeks in September, and it's Italian festival. I'm trying to think of other festivals. That's the biggest one that I can think of, really, that stands out as far as festivals go in Brooklyn.
Okay. And I normally ask, what do the guidebooks recommend that you think are a waste of time? But it seems like a lot of the New York guidebooks don't recommend spending a lot of time in Brooklyn. So is there anything in particular that people are spending time in that you would skip and do something else?
For me, it's probably not going to be popular with your listeners, but I really think Williamsburg is overrated. And Williamsburg seems to be the probably number one or two most mentioned neighborhood when people say where they want to go to in Brooklyn. I frequent Williamsburg plenty of times. I don't visit it often enough, but I've been there plenty of times. I don't understand why. I really think the biggest reason is it's so close to Manhattan that a lot of the younger people that have moved there that work in Manhattan, they find that to be a cool neighborhood since it's so close and they can afford it. Obviously, they have a lot of good restaurants, and I'm not knocking the neighborhood, but I really don't get the hype of a Williamsburg. Maybe I would have 10 years ago in my early 20s. I don't get it now, maybe because I'm married with a kid. That's why I recommend a place like Park Slope, because there's a lot of things to do for young people, but a lot of things to do for pretty much any age. Where Williamsburg has that very young feel that you feel out of place after a while in that neighborhood.
Okay. Any place that you would recommend to stay? that stands out?
As far as hotels?
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Well, your couch would be the other possibility there, but yeah, I was thinking hotels.
Yeah, I charge nightly on my couch. I have a good rate. There's a few hotels. There's a Best Western in Bay Ridge. There's a hotel in downtown Brooklyn called New Hotel, which is an eco-friendly hotel that opened up about 3 years ago. And then there's Hotel Le Bleu, which is in Park Slope, another fancy hotel. But personally, if I was staying in Brooklyn, I'd want to stay like a Brooklynite. A website like HomeAway.com has tons of apartments and houses that you can rent in Brooklyn. I've checked it out personally just to see what they had available, and there's a lot of really nice apartments. And there's also, I mean, it's all over Brooklyn. So if you want to get the real feel of living in Brooklyn for a week, let's say you're planning to move to Brooklyn, because I think it recently came out that Brooklyn is one of the most popular neighborhoods for people to move to due to the fact that they can afford Brooklyn and live in Manhattan. So you're getting a lot of people from financial and tech jobs that are moving into Brooklyn, living there, and then commuting into Manhattan. If you want to get a feel, though, of like what the neighborhood's like, HomeAway really has so many great options and affordable, because the hotels in Brooklyn, believe it or not, are very expensive to stay in. The ones that I've mentioned, pretty pricey, almost competing with Manhattan prices.
Wow. That's saying something.
Yeah. Oh, then there's the Marriott. I mean, everyone loves a Marriott. There's a Marriott by the Brooklyn Bridge that's really popular.
Okay. And what's the best day you've had in Brooklyn? The perfect Brooklyn day.
Okay, besides my son being born in Park Slope, the perfect Brooklyn day, I love springtime in Brooklyn. I'm not a summer person or a winter person. I love springtime in Brooklyn. So a Saturday in Brooklyn, going to the farmer's market again in Park Slope, getting homemade focaccia bread, or whether it's, homemade pie, or the vegetables, and taking that to the park and having it in the park with my wife or my wife and kid. That is the perfect day. Nothing beats being in that park on a 60-degree day. I love my pizza and I love my bagels in Brooklyn, but I take a park day any day, and that's something that I think that I can't stress enough about Brooklyn. People don't realize that we have that going on in Brooklyn.
Any warnings you would give about going to Brooklyn?
Yeah, with any major destination, there are neighborhoods that you're going to want to avoid. There is crime in Brooklyn, which again is something that a lot of my European friends always seem to bring up to me. They're for some reason scared to visit Brooklyn or live in Brooklyn. There are certain neighborhoods, Brownsville, Bedford-Stuyvesant, they're a little rough around the edges. I wouldn't suggest visiting. I know that sounds bad, but honestly, if you're just coming to do this as a trip, there's really not much that you're going to see there. Those are the neighborhoods that I would steer clear of. Besides that, the rest of Brooklyn is very safe and a lot of nice people. I don't know, New York has this stereotype of rude people, but Brooklyn people say please, thank you, you're welcome all the time, or at least the ones that I deal with do.
Now, Brooklyn is known, at least in the New York area, that you can recognize someone who grew up in Brooklyn by the way they talk. Mm-hmm. Are there any language tips for Brooklyn? Oh, man, the language tips for Brooklyn. I guess you don't have to enunciate as much when you're in Brooklyn, because people don't seem to do that. I'm guilty of that. No, I mean, again, there's a lot of ethnic neighborhoods, but again, there's not one neighborhood that you're going to go into that speaks an entirely different language and doesn't speak English. So you're not going to wander into a neighborhood and be completely confused on what's going on. I mean, it's predominantly English speaking. Okay. Where do you go in Brooklyn, look at the scenery and say, thank God I live in Brooklyn? Okay, besides Prospect Park, which I've mentioned various times already, I think also the beaches. Okay. Coney Island Beach, which can be a madhouse in the summer, but if you go there before Memorial Day and after Labor Day, and if you go in May and September where it's a little quieter, it really is a nice beach to just hang out for the day. Also, again, Brooklyn Bridge Park. I recently found Brooklyn Bridge Park. I lived in Brooklyn all my life, and I really never paid attention much to Brooklyn, the DUMBO area. I knew of it, but I really didn't visit it. And when I stumbled upon Brooklyn Bridge Park, to me, I was just like, wow, I cannot believe I haven't been here. I see these people hanging out all day, and I almost felt like I've missed out on so much. But that is a really great spot. Nice green area that just has an amazing view of the Brooklyn Bridge, an amazing view of Manhattan. And I believe they even have concerts in the summer and movies in the summer as well. It's a really cool spot. Now, the one thing we haven't talked about at all are sites like museums or historical sites.
Brooklyn Museum, which is right next to Prospect Park. Brooklyn Museum, which is also next to Brooklyn Botanical Garden, is a really nice museum. I do not have the price on how much it costs. I believe it's just like every other museum where you can just suggested price. But that is a really cool spot to hang out. It's not Brooklyn history. It's pretty much everything in there. I don't have the particulars, though, on Brooklyn Museum, but it definitely is a spot that you should check out, though, if you're by Prospect Park.
Okay. And historical sites?
Historical sites. Coney Island is a historical site. The Cyclone, which is a national landmark, also a New York landmark. The Cyclone roller coaster is probably the only roller coaster that makes me nervous, and that's because it's very old and it shakes a lot, but it's still standing strong, and it's only about $1 or $2.
Oh, wow.
I've been on it in a couple of years. Yeah, you can just ride it over and over. They don't even make you get off the line. You could just sit there and hand over another $1, and they'll let you stay on there. A lot of people don't like when you do that, though. You get dirty looks, but I've done it before. Yeah, Cyclone definitely is something you should try when you're in Brooklyn.
Okay. And as a history buff, one thing I think of in Brooklyn is where the Revolutionary War nearly ended, as George Washington and his army got caught there on Brooklyn Heights by the British Army and the British fleet. So,
oh, I see. I learned something today.
There you go. Yeah.
I like Brooklyn fun facts.
Well, and the fun fact that you had for me that we didn't mention in this show is that what I know of as Saboros, but I'm pronouncing it wrong. Saboros.
I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Which I also know as a chain pizza place. The original real one is actually in Brooklyn, you said.
Yes. I don't have the year, but I believe it was 30 years ago, around the early 80s. And then the second one to open was in Kings Plaza Mall, which is the biggest mall, or the only mall, in Brooklyn. And that's where the second one was, and then it just blew up and became a chain that we all love now.
Although we'll notice that didn't show up on Andrew's list of recommended pizza places. So,
now, recommended pizza places: DeFara's, Grimaldi's, and Simone Gardens.
Anything else we should say before we get to our last two questions here?
Come to Brooklyn and email me if you want to hang out in Brooklyn. I love hanging out with people when they visit Brooklyn. People that visit my site and tell me that they're going to be in Brooklyn or they're going to come to Brooklyn, if I'm available, I don't mind spending a couple hours showing them my Brooklyn. So
excellent. Quite the offer.
Open invitation.
And then last two questions, the typical two questions for the amateur traveler. Finish this sentence. You really know you're in Brooklyn when what? When
cars don't stop at stop signs and then beep at you as you're driving down the as you're driving innocently down the road, and they don't stop at the stop sign and they beep at you and give you the finger, you know you're in Brooklyn.
And there was a reason we were recommending not getting around by driving in Brooklyn.
Take the train, or I'll drive you.
And then if you had to summarize Brooklyn in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Large, ethnic,
okay,
and delicious. There's lots to eat in Brooklyn.
Excellent. Well, and for me, it was a little hard to do a show on Brooklyn because Brooklyn is the home of the big rival baseball team for a Giants fan like me, which is the Brooklyn Trolley Dodgers, now known as the LA Dodgers. But we won't hold that against Brooklyn because I don't think Brooklyn's too fond of them since they moved away anyway. Andrew, thanks so much for coming on the show and telling us about Brooklyn.
I had a great time. Thank you.
In news of the community, I received an email from Percy who said, "Hello, Chris. I think I'd listened to around 6 or 7 of your podcasts back to back on my Monday morning commute. My work takes me away from home on a weekly basis, Europe mainly. Most podcasts have a good mix, taking in different areas of the given country, often with gems of information from local foods, must-see sites, languages. However, on the podcast of Estonia, the ladies seemed only to talk about high-end hotels, wine bars, and international food. Now, as I've mentioned, I travel for my work. Someone else picks up the tab, but eating in a high-end restaurant doesn't tell you much about the country in my experience. A short story for you. A couple of years ago, I was in Cologne, Germany, seated in a little Turkish kebab shop, and it was around 5 minutes from the railway station. Also in the shop was a Spanish guy, a German guy, an American, and of course a couple of Turkish guys. Someone asked a question, I don't remember who, but it ended up with around 30 minutes of chat about everything from why we were there, families, and of course the weather. For me, I thought about the fact that the world could be improved if every one of us had 30 minutes like this. Nice restaurants are great, nice to treat ourselves, nice to treat our loved ones, but I'm a big fan when traveling of getting out away from the tourists and improve myself. And that's interesting. Not everyone had the same reaction to the podcast on Estonia, but I'd say that one probably was a little more upmarket than we usually talk about. And honestly, I hope that everyone finds a few episodes at least of The Amateur Traveler that are out of their comfort zone, because I do want to push your boundaries a little bit, but I certainly understand what Percy is saying, because I also tend to like the little places and don't necessarily go out to the big expensive restaurants for dinner, not just for price reasons, but experience as well. But I would challenge that upmarket does not necessarily imply that we're associating with tourists. Sometimes you'll find an upmarket restaurant scene that is a local scene. And with that, we're going to bring this episode of The Amateur Traveler to a close. Feel free to leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com or send me an email, as Percy did, to host@amateurtraveler.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.